When the rest of the country thinks about Austin, Texas food scene, they'll think about all of our James Beard Award winning restaurants or maybe Franklin's Barbecue. But any local will tell you that the backbone of Austin's food scene is breakfast tacos. If you don't believe me, just go check out Google. It's one of the first things that pops up when you type in Austin breakfast, and just look how many places there are. I couldn't even just find a standard top 10 list because there's just so many places to choose from. They're found in coffee shops, grocery stores, tons of restaurants, and everyone's very opinionated about what they think the best one is. But I personally think that they're overhyped. And why do I say that they're overhyped? It's not because they're not good, don't get me wrong. I love breakfast tacos, but here in Austin, people will wait a really long time, like an hour for really good breakfast tacos, and they're really not that hard to make well. So anyways, let's get started making some breakfast tacos. Flour tortillas are pretty much the standard here in Austin, and they're also my personal preference. I love a good flour tortilla, and making a good flour tortilla from scratch is actually really easy. To start, we need some flour, baking powder, and salt, and then some sort of fat. Traditional would be lard. I'm using bacon fat, but seriously, any fat will do. Oil, vegetable shortening, whatever you want. Whisk those together until the fat is evenly dispersed throughout the flour mixture, and then we're going to go in with some hot water. It is important that the water is hot, but it doesn't have to be boiling. I give it the initial mix with the spatula just because it is so hot, but once it cools a little bit, I'll get into it with my hands and make sure everything comes into a cohesive dough. Given the amount of fat in there, it should leave your bowl pretty clean, and then we're going to move on to kneading it, which you don't have to go crazy with, but definitely give it a knead for at least a few minutes until it forms a relatively smooth ball. And then you're just gonna let that relax in a bowl for, 15 to 60 minutes, whatever you want. You'll be able to tell after it's rested how much smoother and softer it is, and then it's a matter of dividing into equal pieces. I like to use a scale because I'm weird like that to make sure they're perfectly even, but it really doesn't matter that much. Once you're happy with how they're divided, flatten them out, tuck in all the sides, and roll it into a nice even ball. And this is just a little gluten 101. Once we have these into a ball, if you tried to immediately roll them out, they would be really tough and unforgiving and hard to roll out super thin. So I'm gonna make sure that they rest for at least 10 to 15 minutes. When you're ready, here's how I do this. Put a bunch of flour on the counter, flatten it out a little bit and get both sides totally coated, and then start rolling one direction. Flip it upside down and 90 degrees and continue rolling. Try not to roll it out too thin before you flip it and turn it, because that'll make it hard to keep these nice and circular, but all of this takes a little bit of trial and error, and I promise with a little bit of practice you'll be able to figure this out. When it's time to cook, heat up the cast iron to a medium heat, and again, this is going to take a little trial and error. My pan started out a little bit too hot, but when it bubbles up like this, it's time to flip. Time for these will be variable depending on how hot your pan is, but the second side should take about as much time as the first, and then I like to keep these in a little linen towel. Rinse and repeat for the rest of them, and that's it. Now you have your tortillas. Pretty easy, takes a little bit of time and work, but it's worth it. Now the first taco I want to make is something called migas, which is basically corn tortilla chips, tomatoes, onions, and jalapenos with cheese and scrambled eggs. I'm going to leave out the tomatoes, but we are going to need some corn tortillas, and if you need a refresher on how those are made, here it is. So now that we have our corn tortillas, we're just gonna cut them into little squares, heat up a pan with a nice little layer of oil on the bottom, and throw in our tortillas. And that's just gonna make some little corn tortilla chips that are gonna make it into our scramble. You can leave them a little bit lighter or make them crunchy, like me. This is normally done with jalapenos, but I totally spaced on buying them, so I'm going to use red bell peppers and make sure to add a good bit of hot sauce at the end, and then I'm going to add my onions. Always make sure to salt, toss that until everything is nice and cooked and set aside for later. We'll keep the Austin theme going with Vital Farms, which is from Austin, and crack a couple eggs into a bowl. I think 1 to 2 eggs per taco is a pretty good number, and I'm just going to use my immersion blender with the whisk attachment because I just got it and I think it's awesome. And now we just get to scramble everything together, start with the veg and then throw in the eggs. And if you wanted to add tomatoes, now would be the time. And immediately start scrambling everything together. I'm into more of a soft scramble, so I like to cook on a relatively low heat, mix everything together a lot, and go for that small curd, and then throw in my tortilla chips. I think migas deserve a lot of cheese, so we'll go with the meltiest cheese I know, Oaxaca. Finish that off until it's nice and melty, and then into the tortillas it goes. A lot of places serve migas with avocado, so I'll throw that on, and bling bang boom, we got our migas. The next staple is bacon, egg, and cheese, which is just really simple, but here we go. Because I was doing a handful of other things, and because it's usually my preferred method of cooking bacon, we're going to throw bacon onto a sheet tray. I usually throw foil and parchment on there so nothing sticks and it doesn't get my pan dirty. Bacon comes out perfectly crispy and even every time. Pour off the bacon fat and save that for later. Chop up the bacon. And then I personally think that mixing the bacon into the scrambled eggs works better than just putting 2 big strips onto your tortillas, but you know, to each their own. A lot of places put the cheese on top after the fact, but I always melt it in because I prefer it that way, and there's your bacon, egg, and cheese tacos. And these are all looking a little bit similar, but you get the point. Here's potato, egg, and cheese. In hindsight, this might be getting a little bit repetitive, but for my third and final taco, I'm just going to put some potatoes in the eggs and cheese, and I think that the best way to go about this is to chop them up really small and fry them until they're crispy. I ended up finishing mine in the oven to clear up the pan that I was using, but crispy potatoes are better than not crispy potatoes. Cool, obviously crispy, so you're just going to follow the same steps, scramble them in, add the cheese into the tortilla, and there are your potato, egg, and cheese tacos. And then I'm kind of a hot sauce junkie, so let's give one sauce to each taco. Migas is going to get this jalapeno cilantro sauce I made. Potatoes are going to get truff, because truffle and potatoes are a match made in heaven. And the bacon will get more of a classic hot sauce, because it just makes sense with a classic like bacon, egg, and cheese. And voila, there are my tacos. And so, the staple of Austin, breakfast tacos. Try it out, don't spend a fortune of money on great food, and I'll see you in the next one.